Hey, so today I thought it could be interesting to go over some potentially useful, creative kind of composition tricks that I used on some songs on my recently released EP called On a Brick Speedboat, which is available everywhere you listen to music. So this is the title track underneath where I'm talking right now, Through the Deluge, as it was all written and arranged on the Deluge. The entire EP was really. And so I thought I'd start with this track just to show maybe some potentially useful tricks or kind of compositional ideas that got me started or kind of continued the creative process for me with this one. So you're hearing the song now as it is in the arranger mode on the Deluge. And really, where this all started for me with this particular track was the sound design using just the Deluge internal synth. So I'll stop now and then get into this guy here, which is just an internal synth patch that I made using the analog saw and analog square oscillators. They're virtual analog, so they are meant to emulate the analog behavior of square and saw oscillators in a classic synth, for example. The Deluge has normal square and saw waves as well, but these were added in later firmware updates to kind of give a bit more, I guess, a bit more analog warmth or depth. So I basically just started with a couple of those oscillators and some phaser, some delay, a little bit of reverb. And I really liked there's some panning, some ping pong going on, so it just adds some movement. And that's where the song started. So I find that, when I'm stuck for ideas, or I'm not sure where to go next, or I'm not sure what to do, sometimes just sitting there and noodling with a sound and trying to get a sound that inspires me can really help. And that's exactly how this song started, and the rest kind of continued from there. So whatever synth you have, this isn't really, a lot of these tips or creative ideas aren't limited to owners of the Synthstrom Deluge. You can do a lot of this on any synth. My goal over the holidays, for example, was to sit with some synths I haven't paid a lot of attention to and just do some sound design to get me kind of started on a new idea and kind of get excited for a sound I really want to use and get out there. So that was the way this started. So yeah, tip number one isn't really anything new. Just, get lost in sound design. And in my case, the Deluge internal synth is a lot more capable, I think, than some people will admit or want to believe. Once you learn the shortcuts, it's pretty easy to dial something in that I find nice. But your mileage may vary. Maybe it's not for you. Maybe you have a different workflow you like. Certainly a knob per function synth is fun too. So anyway, yeah, sound design, get lost in it, and maybe a new idea will strike you. Another thing that I like to do a lot is kind of a variety of drum stacking. So you'll see in this track, I've got my synth we just went through. I've got an electronic kit that came stock with the Deluge. There's a bass I made. There's a synth I made with an ARP. And there's an acoustic kit. Kalimba from my friend Joey's farmhouse. And there's another acoustic kit that I sampled through the XLN XO app and brought into the Deluge. And that is nothing. And there's a bass, another bass, which we'll get into. So there are three drum kits here. And I'll solo them. If I can now remember which ones were which. There you go. So I'll solo these kits. And you can kind of hear when it kicks in. So you've got, there's the classic kind of 80s kit. Then there's some acoustic drums just to add some flavor. A lot of toms get used in this toward the end. There you go. And then here, the XO kit hasn't kicked in yet, actually. It comes in the chorus. So here. There, you got that. You can hear a bit more electronic drum sounds to kind of contrast with the acoustic and the older 80s kind of sounds. So there's like some nice layered drums that they really kick in the end of the song. Some snares going in from the acoustic kit, some toms happening. So stacking drums, and I really like, this is something I do a lot, stacking electronic and acoustic samples. just for a bit of interest and depth, or just multiple copies of the same electronic kit I find can be really fun, especially just saturating one or adding delay, pitch shifting one. There's just adds some depth, just different. I think of it kind of like painting, like adding things in the background, things in the foreground, and receding things. Maybe sometimes they're just a copy of something that's already in the foreground, but I've pitch shifted it a little bit so it's not as deep, or it's deeper, just whatever the track needs. But yeah, so stacking different types of drum sounds. They're not always from the same sample packs, or sometimes I've found them myself. Sometimes they're acoustic, sometimes they're 80s or just random sounds that weren't meant to be drums, but I find they can layer nicely and you end up with a pretty cool variety. So I do that a lot. Also, speaking of layering, you might have seen when I was going through these tracks that I've got a bass that will kick in there. But then I've also got, that's a lower bass, and then I've got this guy. So at this point, the low bass does an ARP, but the higher kind of mid, that started as a bass sound, but it ends up more in the mid-high frequencies, and I find that can really help the bass punch through a track. Specifically, let's get back to where the bass is, but specifically on systems that maybe don't have the best sound reproduction, like headphones or laptops, that mid bass is still going to come through, even if that lower throbbing bass doesn't make it. So there's still some representation of what you're trying to go for with the lower end. In that case, they're doing two completely different things. One's an ARP and one's more of a sweep, but they can add, again, just variety and depth, and just punch, and overall kind of encourage people to listen through the journey if they can hear that kind of low end on all systems. It's something that I haven't done very well all the time, but I'm getting better at as I release more music or work on more music, is trying to make sure that bass, that low end, comes through on all systems and isn't just sub bass that you can feel in a good set of monitors or a car. But in any case, yeah, so stacking the drums, and now we're stacking the bass, because a nice low sub bass or a nice low register is great on the right system, but you lose it on something that's not as high end, or people walking around on headphones. I know I listen in earbuds all the time on transit or whatever, and you might lose a lot of that low end that you work so carefully on. So I find a nice stacked kind of bass layer can give a lot of extra oomph or presence to a bass on different systems. And again, this is the title track from the EP On a Brick Speedboat. This song's called Brick Speedboat. And if you're, people who have made it this far, you can get a little tidbit. It was named that because when I was initially working in the Deluge Arranger on this song, before I got more complex with all these extra layers and things, it looked to me like the shape of a speedboat made out of bricks. It's, wasn't really a Lego reference initially, all that stuff, but it got more complex and I added things, and it lost that a little bit, but that was the genesis of it. After I got that initial synth stab that I was playing with, and started layering the tracks in, it looked to me like a speedboat, and that's where the name came. So there you go. Another tip, maybe your naming convention. You could come from anywhere. Who knows? People can read into it how they want. I think naming songs in an interesting, evocative way is really fun. Okay, so to recap, start with sound design. If you're stuck, just mess with your synth, whatever you're using, and dig into the patches you can create. Even start with a preset, maybe add an effect or turn it into an ARP or a filter sweep, and that might just inspire you to push and take that to the finish line as a new song. Maybe it gets you across the finish line enough that you want to add other things and start messing with things. The next thing you know, you've created something that's worth finishing, and it all just started from sound exploration. In my case, I'm always impressed with the Deluge internal synth, and there's always something fun I can do with it that I didn't realize I could. Even if I'm starting from samples or whatever else, yeah, you can really get some mileage out of what you've got in front of you just as a starting point. And again, then I said, mixing acoustic and electronic drums. New samples, old samples, new kits, old kits, like based on classics or found sounds you've just collected. I really like to mix an acoustic sounding kind of jazz kit with classic 808s or 909s or XLN XO kits that I've exported from the computer. Just there's so much you can do when you have layers of percussion to pull from. So that maybe in your chorus, you suddenly bring in that element that wasn't there before. And it really punches things up a bit and keeps the interest going. And then again, same thing for bass. Layer that bass if you feel like you like to work with a sub bass or a low end throb. Then maybe you might need something that's a bit higher in the midsection to mimic that. That will help it translate onto more speakers. When you lose that low end on some speakers, that mid kind of higher end of the bass you've layered will still persist. Also, it gives you the option, like I've done, to kind of separate them in some ways, and maybe your sub bass can do something that your other layer is not doing, and then there's variety and depth. Obviously, all of this is with a grain of salt, because you can add too much layering, so you maybe have too many kits, too many basses, and now you've got no focus. Certainly, I'm guilty of that often, but that's part of the journey we're all on, is just trying to figure it out, right? So I find these tricks work with me, and in this case, the song I'm really happy with, the song Brick Speedboat. Like I said, title track to the EP. It's On a Brick Speedboat is the EP, out everywhere, and this song is something I'm very, very pleased with how it turned out. I was working on it for a long time, but these little creative kind of tricks really helped me kind of push it further, and they're things that I've since taken to tracks that I've worked on while I was kind of marinating this one a bit. I've worked on other things and used some of those as well. So tons more. If you like this type of stuff, I've got notes and notes of things I've done that I think are maybe interesting on all the new tracks. And some of them I didn't do on this song, but I did on other ones. And if this is the sort of thing you like, I'll probably post more of this, just because I find it interesting, just to recap for myself. And obviously feel free to comment if there's something you're curious about, or something you like to do that maybe I should check out, because it's you're never finished on this sort of kind of never-ending creative journey. Anyway, if you made it this far, I appreciate it. Check out On a Brick Speedboat by Bay Mud on all of the services you could possibly find, and let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.